Hi. Hello, everybody. First of all, I want to say happy Halloween to people who are celebrating Halloween. If you are young adults and you have little ones in your home, you may be getting ready to partake in some Halloween festivities, whether you are going trick or treating or taking the kiddies to a Halloween party. I know a lot of people do not celebrate Halloween. People who believe in religion, tend to not participate in Halloween due to the teachings of your religion. To each his own. I know myself, when I had a little girl in my home, we celebrated Halloween. And it wasn't about evil spirits and all that blah blah that the Bible teaches us. It's basically just because, you know, anything to celebrate life with one another, having a good time, however you decide to do it, I was all for it. There's so many things in this world to be sad and depressed about that anytime you get an opportunity to celebrate life, even on Halloween, it's not about what the Bible teaches about Halloween. It's about being together, celebrating, eating all the goodies, the sweets, the junk. Um, and some people choose to dress up in costumes, and you don't have to dress up in costumes that quote unquote worships the devil. Like, you can wear costumes that are little angels, shepherds, um, there's so many other choices that you can dress up as little princesses, ballerinas, cowboys. Like, Halloween does not have to be about evil things. But anyway, with that being said, that's not why we're here. So my name is Johnny Belinda Hopkins, guys. For those who are here for the first time, I am the new author of the published book titled God's Gift to You. Book one comes in paperback, comes in hardcover for those who prefer the hardcover. The books are available for sale at Amazon, Barnes& and Noble, Walmart, dorinsbookstore.com, and many other places that I'm probably not aware of. So, I am a woman in my mid 50s, and during the pandemic decided to write a book. And here it is. It's a book about growing up in Boston in the Roxbury Dorchester section in the 70s and the 80s. It is an account of my experiences as a little girl growing up in Boston during the 70s and 80s, where there was an epidemic of young adults who were dealing drugs, using and abusing drugs, having children, and abusing the children. This book is not for the faint at heart. If you are sensitive to children being abused, this book may not be for you. But this is my story, and I wrote it. And this is the building that I grew up in Boston. I don't know if anybody is familiar with Franklin Park, but I grew up across the street as a little girl from Franklin Park Zoo, which is a main attraction in Boston, Massachusetts. Boston, Massachusetts is known for a lot of its historical events. It is a major city as it is the capital of Massachusetts. So there's a lot of things to do that tourists go to Boston to enjoy. But there is another side of Boston that a lot of people don't know about. And because I grew up there, I talk about it. Um, because the book is based on childhood trauma, I decided after writing my book that I was going to advocate for mental health awareness, mental health wellness tied to education because there are so many people in the world today walking around with a mental health illness that they either aren't in touch with, um, they are not seeking medical treatment for it. For people who don't know, mental health illnesses is a medical condition, just like diabetes, hypertension, um, cardiovascular diseases, and people seem to be more acceptable when you talk about medical conditions such as diabetes, high blood pressure, cardiovascular diseases. You start talking about mental health, and people tend to shy away from those conversations. It's not a conversation people like to have. But since I wrote my book, God's Gift to You, talking about my childhood, which sparked me to have a mental health disease. So I wanted to advocate for mental health awareness, mental health wellness tied to education. I wanted to create a environment on social media for people to go to get information about mental health diseases, signs and symptoms, causes and effects, and how to manage your life with a mental health illness from the safety and privacy of your own home. That is why I have my own YouTube channel, Jonniebee 9458, advocating for mental health awareness, mental health wellness tied to education. Being that I have a mental health illness, I know that there are a lot of stigmas about mental health. I know that a lot of people, out of ignorance, right? They judge people with mental health illnesses. They criticize them. They shame them. Um, so I wanted to be a person who actually speaks up about mental health illnesses. I stayed silent about my mental health illness for many years because one, I was ashamed, I was embarrassed. Um, I had a hard time accepting that I had a mental health illness. Two, because people can be cruel, they criticize, they judge, they make people feel ashamed about having a mental health illness. Um, and three, because it took me a lot of years to come to terms with the fact that I had a mental health illness, such as writing my book. In this book, I talk about things that I thought I would take to my grave. It was suggested to me several times throughout my life that I should write a book about my life. And I want to say when I was in my 30s, it was suggested to me that I write a book about my life. And I was like, yeah, we're not doing that. Um, it was suggested to me again in my 40s that I write a book about my life. And I was like, yeah, we're not doing that. Because my story is so difficult to talk about and so horrific that when I became an adult, after surviving all that stuff, I told myself that, I got past it, I lived through it, and I never had to go back there again. However, because of the mental health illness that stemmed from a lot of things that took place in my childhood, I lived through my life, the first half of my life, with a mental health illness that I was not in touch with, that I was not aware about, and I was causing myself harm. I was having harmful thoughts. I was doing harmful things to myself. And it wasn't until I became aware that something was wrong with me and got past all the stigmas that were placed in me in my community, growing up in a Black community. You mentioned psychiatrists, and the first thing people say is, I'm not crazy. However, if you watch how they live their lives, right, obviously something is wrong. And again, that stigma with putting I'm not crazy with psychiatrists and mental health professionals or mental health patients. Um, Mental health illnesses does not mean you're crazy. And what is crazy anyway? Um, a lot of people have mental health illnesses and they don't want to get in touch with that stuff. They don't want to accept that they have a mental health illness. However, a lot of them suffer because they have a mental health illness that they don't want to know anything about. And they continue to suffer throughout their life because of that mental health illness. I'm going to tell you that scientists, researchers, providers, the textbook information, okay? They say if you have a family member, a blood relative, such as a mother or a sibling with a mental health condition, chances are you have one too. With that being said, my mother, I've never met her mother or her father. And in my early 20s, my mother said to me that her mother went crazy and died in a mental institution. And I had to say to my mother, like, gee, mom, like people don't just go crazy and die because they go crazy. There had to have been some other factors involved that clearly my mother knew nothing about. Um, when my mother said that to me, some red flags started going up because I grew up with this woman. I know that this woman has a mental health illness that went undetected because in her younger years, not only did she have an underlying mental health condition, but the signs and symptoms went unnoticeable and undetected because she was active with the disease of addiction. So most people just seen a young woman battling the disease of addiction, not realizing that there was a mental health issue underlying it. A lot of her signs and symptoms looked like they were coming from her using and abusing drugs, but once she stopped using and abusing drugs, there were still signs and symptoms that something was very wrong. But again, a lot of people live their life out with a mental health disease that they don't acknowledge, they don't address. Um, but I can tell you, it affects them, it affects their lives, it affects their relationships that they have with people. Um, so anyway, I had a sister. Her name was April. She was 1 year older than me. She, throughout her life, struggled with mental health illnesses. She was first diagnosed with depression. After some time, it got upgraded to manic depression, and eventually it got upgraded to bipolar. With that being said, when I was in my mid-20s, I myself started having signs and symptoms of a mental health illness. And even though I was surrounded by people with mental health illnesses, and I might have known about mental health illnesses, but when you live in a family and you are interacting with this family on a day-to-day basis, even through all the toxicity, like, you just don't relate it to having a mental health illness. Um, I didn't learn about mental health illnesses until in my 20s when I started going to school to work in doctor's offices. That was my dream, that was my goal. I wanted to work in doctor's offices. Um, so while going to school to get a degree, I have an associate's degree in um, health sciences. I also graduated from Branfield Hall Career Institute with a certificate for medical assisting. Um, I worked in doctor's offices from the time I was 19 up until my mid 40s, including going to school and taking many different courses regarding health sciences, whether it be, um, what is it? I gotta slow my brain down, guys. And just so you guys know, part of having a mental health disease, right? I was diagnosed with depression, which comes with anxiety and panic attacks. And signs and symptoms of depression, um, I struggle with racing thoughts. For those who don't know what that is, it's like your brain on one side has like all the good information. On the other side, it has like all the negative thoughts, all the bad information. And both sides are going by so fast that it's hard to, catch some information, like, you have to what I did was I had to train my brain how to focus more on the positive thoughts and the positive information, the good information, and tune out the negative thoughts, the negative information, um and that comes with time. In the beginning, I wasn't able to do that. Um, there was a time in my life where I was having harmful thoughts and I was doing harmful things to myself, and I didn't know that the things that I were doing was harmful thoughts or harmful to myself. It was just the information that was louder to me than the good information. So that's part of having a mental health illness, having racing thoughts. I cannot control it. It gets overwhelming. Um, it affects like my memory. We can get forgetful. It affects my focus. Like it's hard for me to focus. And even though I have this condition, like I've trained myself to continue to educate myself in work because I didn't want my mental health disease to define who I was. Um, there was a time that the doctors wanted to pull me out of work and put me on Social Security disability. And at the time, it sounded like a great idea. But when I seen how much money I would be getting, I was like, I can't live off of that. Um, and only because I have come accustomed to a lifestyle that requires a little bit more money for me to be comfortable. A lot of people with mental health illnesses, they don't never learn how to drive or have a vehicle. I was not one of those people. I knew how to drive, I had a vehicle, and I didn't feel like I would be able to maintain my lifestyle off of Social Security disability because beyond having to pay rent, I have to pay car insurance. I have to have a budget to maintain my car as far as oil changes, putting gas in the car, if something goes wrong with the car, having the money I need to fix my car. And I prefer having a car because of my anxiety. There was a time when I lived in Boston as a young woman. I didn't have a car, and having to catch public transportation, I had a lot of anxiety, when on a bus or train. I don't know if anybody knows anything about Boston, but it's crowded there. It's crowded there. Like the train system, the bus system, it would be so packed that I struggled with my anxiety. So I learned how to drive and I purchased a vehicle and I felt better um getting to the places that I needed to go. Being able to drive. Um and again, it's also about breaking generational curses. Um my mom and dad never finished high school or furthered their education beyond whatever grade level they dropped out at. Um, my sister never finished. I don't even know if she went to high school. I know she might have finished middle school. She might have made it to high school, but she didn't complete her grade years of school, and she never furthered her education beyond whatever grade level she dropped out at. Um, my youngest brother, because there's four of us, there's two girls and there's two boys. My sister was born first, then me, then my first brother, who was underneath me by 2 years, and then my baby brother, who was underneath me by 3 years. So the baby brother also did not finish high school. Um, the brother underneath me, I'm not sure because, you know, um, I'm gonna share some information with you guys, but I'm not gonna give away the book because the book has so many things that um will help people to understand about mental health illnesses, signs and symptoms, causes and effects. But I am going to tell you this. Part of my story is that at some point in my mother's life, her four children were taken from her. And we were taken from her by the Department of Social Services and we were separated. And so for many years, I did not know where my mom and my siblings were. So I don't know what life was like for them in that time that I was away from them. Um, when I was in the custody of, back then it was called Department of Social Services. Um, I was not allowed to have contact with my mom for many years. So as an adult, once you turn 18 years old, Department of Social Services can no longer hold you. They have to release you. And when that happened, I went to look for my mom and my siblings because, I was old enough to have had a relationship with them before the Department of Social Services removed me from them. So I spent years like just wondering where they were they okay? Um, and when I became an adult, it was imperative to me that I find my family. So when I tell you I'm not sure if my brother underneath me actually finished high school, it's because we weren't in each other's lives for a lot of years through our childhood, and I'm talking late childhood. So education became so important to me that as an adult, I went to a 2-year college. I got my associate's degree in medical sciences, studying. healthcare. Um, I took anatomy, physiology, um, I took, like it was so much stuff, like, they teach you the legal aspect of the medical field, like, when you're preparing to work in doctor's offices, healthcare settings, like, there's a lot of legal stuff you have to learn, and then studying anatomy and physiology, which is study of the body and study of the mind. And I might not be saying it in the right terms. I am in my mid 50s. It has been a long time. There's so much information in here throughout the years that, you know, um, you tend to forget some stuff. I not only studied in the medical field, but I've worked in doctor's offices my entire life up until my mid 40s. So I have a knowledge, when it comes to the human body, the mind. Um, and it was, like I said, imperative for me to learn about, mental health illnesses because apparently they run in my family. They affect every one of us. It was more devastating for me to manage life with a mental health illness. Not only did I have to learn how to manage my life with a mental health illness, but I also had to walk beside my sister and watch her go through things because of her mental health illness. And learning about mental health illnesses made it easy for me to, I'm not going to say easy, I'm going to say possible, made it possible for me to still have a relationship with my mother because my mother was so abusive to us as children. Um, I had to learn about forgiveness. Um, I had to learn to forgive my mom for the abuse because while studying about mental health illnesses, I had to realize that that woman that raised me was not my mother. That was some woman that I knew nothing about. Um, but it helped me to understand my mom and see her in a different light. Um, and I have forgiven her, but I don't forget just because, you know, the choices that my mother made throughout her life not only affected me, but affected my siblings. It's very difficult to manage life when you come from a background of being mentally, physically, sexually, financially, like, abused. Um, you grow up in life, and when you become an adult, there's so much things that you don't know because A, you never finished high school, B, you may have a lot of, um, damage due to the childhood abuse. Um, C, you know, with my sister, I guess because she never finished high school, she struggled with learning. You know, Being undereducated can have an enormous impact on your life. Um, I've had to do things for my sister like, counting money because she struggled with math, and I'm talking basic math, like 10 plus 15. And that's just adding and subtracting. It doesn't even include like division, multiplication. Yeah, my sister struggled with learning. So when I became a young adult, it was very important for me to educate myself. I never finished high school because I was taken from my mom by the time I was like 11 or 12 years old by the Department of Social Services, and they put me in what is called protective custody. I was not allowed to have contact with my mom. And because of that, there were times when I was in locked facilities. I never went outside, and I assumed that the Department of Social Services was more concerned with my safety than they were my education, because I didn't go to school when I was in custody of the state. And when I did go to school, it was like, and this was when I was in foster homes, because, of course, when I was taken from my mom and put in protective custody, I got moved around a lot from different foster homes. Um, I got labeled as a runner. And what that means is any chance I got to run away, I ran. I would not stay in the foster homes. I was always running away, trying to get myself back to Boston to find my family, because even though mom was harmful to me, at that point, I didn't know mom was harmful to me. I just thought that was life, and this is just what adults do. Um, so I was devastated when the Department of Social Services took me and my siblings from my mom, because I grew up in a Black community in Boston, in the Roxbury and Dorchester section, in the 70s and 80s, and we were still segregated back then. What that means is white people did not come in our communities, and we did not go in theirs. The only time white people came into our communities were to buy our drugs, or, it would be like caseworkers, case managers, truancy officers, social workers, and even then, they brought a Black person with them. I'm laughing, but it's not funny. This is a true story. So I didn't grow up around white people. I knew they existed, but I didn't really see them in my community. So when the Department of Social Services took me from my mom and took me from my community and put me, like, they didn't put me in Black family homes. They put me in Caucasian family homes. And it was quite devastating to me because, mind you, I tell you, when I lived in Boston in the Roxbury and Dorchester section in the 70s and the 80s, there was still racism and we were segregated. So when they would put me in a all Caucasian foster home, some of those Caucasian people was not nice to me. Little Black girl from a little Black neighborhood, in an all white community where racism was real. So some of those foster homes that the Department of Social Services placed me in was not good for me. So every chance I got, yes, I ran away. I wanted to go back home to Boston. I wanted to find my mom. I wanted to find my siblings. Um, and after a while of running away from foster homes, they decided to put me in a locked facility so that I couldn't run away. So I spent a couple of years in a locked facility. And with that being said, that's why I never finished high school. The Department of Social Services was more concerned with my safety than they were my education at the time, because, maybe if I stayed in my foster home, maybe eventually they would have put me back in school. But that did not happen. So as an adult, when I turned 18 years old, I was still in a foster home. I had not completed high school. And at 19 years old, I got pregnant. So at 19 years old, I am pregnant. And now I have to start thinking about not just myself, but another person. So I went back to school and got my GED. And from there, I went to a 2-year college. And from there, I just started taking classes and courses and at trade schools, business schools, like anywhere I could get an education, that's what I did. I don't know if anybody remembers this program, but in Boston, um, in the early 90s, there was a program called ABCD. And what they taught was business and accounting. I went and took business and accounting. Um, from there, I went to a 2-year college and got my associate's degree. Um, I also went to Branford Hall Career Institute and got a certificate for medical assistant. I also went to school for billing and coding. I got my degree in billing and coding. I took the state board test and passed so that I was licensed to practice billing and coding. Um, I've done so much, like, as far as my education because I liked learning. Once I went to the 2-year college and realized, like, that when I went to the 2-year college, I realized that I liked going to school, and that's what I did. Um, so after I graduated from my 2-year college, like, I started getting jobs for the major hospitals in Boston. I worked for Brigham and Women's Hospital. I worked for Children's Hospital in Boston. I worked for Beth Israel Deaconess Medical Center in Boston. Um, I've worked for, like, neighborhood health centers. I've worked in specialty doctors' offices, such as things like asthma and allergy. I worked at a, laser and dermatology practice. Like, I just like I said, I spent probably my whole 20s, 30s, and up into my mid-40s working for doctors' offices, going to school and learning anything that I could learn to, um, not just be employable, but to be valuable to a company. Like, I didn't want to learn one thing. I wanted to, put myself in position where I could fill multiple positions in an entity, um, so that I could have, like, that false quote unquote job security, right? Society teaches us to multitask. A lot of companies need people to fill multiple positions. And the more educated you are and the more like licenses and degrees you have, that company is able to use you in different positions. And that's what I did, all while raising a young girl and having a mental health illness because I didn't discover until my mid-20s, that was when my signs and symptoms started appearing. I started having anxiety attacks, I started having panic attacks, I started having, like, these outbursts against my mate who I was with for 18 years. Um it was bad. It was bad, like, the signs and symptoms, um so when I first met my mate who I was with for 18 years, in the beginning, everything was great. We were both in love, or at least we thought we were. It was new, we got along. He was not physically or mentally abusive towards me, um, and everything was great until it wasn't after probably 5 years into the relationship, I started having these outbursts on him. And in the beginning, I didn't really pay attention to it. It would happen and I would see the devastation on his face and I would feel bad like, "Oh my god, what just happened?" Um And the symptoms, when they started coming, like, they were far apart and they were mild. Like, it would happen, it was like no big deal, we'd move on, it wouldn't happen again until it did. And then what started happening is they started becoming more tense and they started moving closer together, like it was happening more frequently. And there was a time when I would know when it would happen. Like I could feel it building up inside me, and I would tell myself, "Oh God, like no, not again." Like I would tell myself, "Just don't spaz out. Just don't spaz out. Just don't spaz out." But I had no control of it. Like it would just, it would happen, and then I would have to deal with the feelings behind it happening. Like, for me, it was like I was devastated. So I can only imagine how this young man might have felt. Um, and then like having to see the expression on his face, when I would have these outbursts towards him and the confusion and it was bad. It was bad and it got real bad. We were young, we were in love, we were very intimate in the first few years of our relationship, and then all of a sudden, I didn't wanna be touched by him. I might laugh, but I'm just weird like that, it's not funny. Anyway, so we argued about being intimate with one another. He was a young man, I was a young woman. We had been intimate for the past 5 years, and it was great until all of a sudden it wasn't. And it wasn't anything that he was doing, it was me. And I didn't know why I would have these outbursts on him. I didn't know why all of a sudden I didn't want him to touch me. Like I would try to go to bed before him and play like I was asleep so that I could avoid being intimate with him. Um During the times that we were intimate, I would complain the whole time. I just wanted him to hurry up and finish and get off of me. It was bad. It was bad. And eventually he agreed that I would go to therapy and he would go with me to support me. Like we had to figure out why these things were happening to me. I also struggled with my young child when she was like 4 years old. I like I said, my mom was very abusive towards me in my childhood. So when I grew up and became a mom and my daughter became like 4 years old, it was hard to like safely discipline her or it was just hard and I had to seek therapy for that. Like um I knew that I didn't want to hurt my young child. I knew that I was not well, and I decided to start getting therapy and getting counseling. And so I went to this place and I took my daughter with me. And while I had counseling or therapy for an hour, she would have her own counseling therapy session for an hour. And then after we both got done with our hour therapy counseling session, they would bring us together and counsel us together, like teach me how to communicate with a young person, like 4 or 5 years old, in an appropriate way. How for us to be able to connect um in a an appropriate way. Yeah, I had to do a lot of work on myself. And while I am in therapy and addressing my own mental health issues, I'm watching my siblings go through their mental health issues, and it was a lot. It was a lot. So anyway, I got through that part of my life. And you know, for the next years to come, I would start to struggle with mental health illnesses, and, it affected my life. It affected, like, I would get a job, I would lose a job. I would get a job, I would lose a job. And for years, I kept trying to figure out what it is about me that I always kept getting fired. It was devastating to me. Um, it messed with my self-worth. It messed with my, self-esteem. I started taking courses on how to deal with difficult people, because I didn't think that a lot of it had to do with me because I could do my job. I was very good at what I did. I was very knowledgeable in what I did. But the problem came when trying to deal with other people. Anytime you work at a job and you're working with other people, there are other different personalities. When you go into a work setting, there's a lot of us that are under extreme pressure to be able to perform our jobs and perform them well, be respectful to others. You have like all these companies' policies and do's and don'ts. And, it was so much going on. Like I always loved my job, I always loved what I did. But when you're dealing with the public and you're dealing with whether they were patients or customers or even coworkers, right? All these different personalities you're trying to maneuver through. And for years, I kept getting fired and not succeeding. When I worked in doctor's offices, when I first started working in doctor's offices, I was not that much in touch with my mental health disease, the signs, the symptoms. I had to learn about triggers. So when I worked in the doctor's offices and I would be like a medical receptionist, I'm at the front desk. I am the first contact that patients would have when they come into the doctor's office. I'm answering phones, I'm checking patients in and out. I have to, like, when patients come in to be seen, I have to ask them for their insurance cards and their co-pays. And some people, I would just, I mean, all I would say is, do you have your insurance card on you? Or, you have a copay. I need to collect your copay. And they would get upset. They would get angry. And, you know, I try to, like, just do my job without, pissing people off, but, some people, like, I'm not the only one in the world with a mental health condition. So when you're trying to, and let me tell you, part of the job, right? When you are the face of the company and you are the first contact that people have when they come to that business, you have to be smiling all the time. You have to have a positive attitude. You have to be friendly. You have to be warm to people. You have to know how to talk to people. But sometimes that crap don't matter because some people, like when they come into the doctor's office, they're sick. They need to see a provider. Maybe they're in pain. But if they have a lapse in their insurance and they don't have insurance and they have to pay out of pocket, maybe they're struggling with their finances and don't have the money to pay. So when you would ask them for a copay, they would spaz out on you. And in my younger years, before I learned about triggers, when I would be at the desk at a doctor's office greeting patients, and as soon as patients would start like screaming at me, I had this thing where I would start crying. um, I could feel it coming. I would tell myself, "Oh my god, don't do this," because you can't be in a professional environment and bawling your eyes out. It doesn't look good for you or the company. But I had to learn that when people yelled at me, it would trigger me because as a little girl, mom screamed at me a lot because of her mental health illness. And this woman, I'm talking like not normal yell and scream, right? We're talking a whole different level of yelling and screaming because mom was abusing drugs. And when she couldn't get her drug of choice, it was nothing pretty. So I had not yet made that connection into my childhood when I was in my early 20s and started working in providers' offices. I had not yet encountered somebody who would yell and scream at me and trigger me in that way. And so for a lot of years, when I would start crying at the doctor's offices, or I would be like, "Oh my God, like, why is this person yelling at me?" Like I would freeze up, I would panic. I couldn't think right, I couldn't focus. This is what it was like when I got triggered. And a lot of people labeled me as being rude. Oh, she's rude. Um, and for years I believed that stuff. Like I couldn't figure out what like I'm an overthinker, right? And when somebody tells me like I understand constructive criticism. Like if somebody tells me something, right, I'm gonna weigh it out. I'm gonna consider the information that is being given to me. I'm gonna play that tape out. Like, how am I being rude? Like, was it like what like? I spent years with people telling me it's not what you say, it's how you say it, right? How do I say things? I mean, I grew up in Boston, right? In a neighborhood where it was very toxic, everybody was abusing everybody, and that was just the normal way of life. Nobody knew that it wasn't normal, right? So the way I communicated with people, I had to learn how to communicate with people in a healthy way because where I come from in Boston, there's a certain way we talk to each other that's normal to us. But to other people, they think it's rude. Um, so I had to learn how to communicate with people in a way that was acceptable to those people. Um, but for me, it doesn't matter how hard I try to be nice and be kind and be pleasant to people. Some people, you just can't be nice and kind and pleasant with them because they always find a way to make it all about you. You're being rude, you're this, you're that. Well, what about your actions? I mean, if I work in a doctor's office and I've been doing it for years, right? Um, Obviously I'm doing something right because they not only employed me, yes, I would get fired eventually after a year or two, but they wouldn't have kept me for a year or two if I was that rude. Um, but because people, right? Like I said, I'm not the only one in this world with a mental health disease, right? The difference is that I identify, I acknowledge, and I address my mental health disease, signs and symptoms, causes and effects. But not everybody has identified, acknowledged, or addressed their mental health disease. So they will spaz out on you, and you're just sitting there like, what the and they'll blame you. It's your fault. So yeah, eventually, I would get fired. Um, there are times when I'm working in the doctor's office when a patient would spouse out on me, and I would have to remove myself from the front desk and ask for help. Like, hey, can you go, take care of that patient? I need help. And sometimes, right, the providers, when it comes to ruly patients, they don't want to deal with them. They put it on you. They don't wanna deal with them. So you're stuck here with an unruly patient, unsupported by your employer because they don't wanna deal with it. They leave it up to you to deal with that person, and they don't offer you no help. And you do the best you can. I don't know. I just think like and that's just the patients. We're not even talking about coworkers because When you have a bunch of people, right, from different walks of life, from different backgrounds, from different family structures, right? Everybody needs a job. We all got to pay rent. Um, People at work can be under so much pressure because of the job's expectation. The jobs, they want you to be able to do 5 things at one time in a timely period with little to no errors. They want you to always have a positive attitude, even though people are being rude to you all day. You got to keep that smile on your face. Don't take it personal. Um, and when things go wrong, people get so scared that they're going to lose their job that they turn on each other, coworkers. They start pointing the finger. They don't want to be accountable for the role that they played in. It's all you, it's never them. You did this, you did that. Like, we're all under so much pressure to not just get a job, but maintain that job because we got families to take care of. We got rent to pay. We got bills to pay. And it can get so crazy, and then you have the managers, the people in positions. You think none of them got mental health issues? You think none of them are under pressure or stress at work? You have all these different people in this company trying to do the same thing, trying to reach the same goal, and as long as everything goes smoothly, everything's great. But I'm going to tell you, as humans, we are not perfect people. We are going to make mistakes. Things are going to happen beyond our control, right? Then you get called to the office. I cannot tell you how many times I have been written up. It's usually not about my job performance. It's usually about it's not what I said, but how I said it. So you grow up in a society who tries to put you in a box. Like, they try to tell you how to walk, how to talk, what is appropriate conversation, what is not appropriate conversation. Um, you know, how to stand, how to talk without, some of us, we get that head rolling, we get that head moving. So you're trying to, like, not move the head, communicate with people. They say if you stand like this, or you're trying to, like, it's too much. It is too much. It's not just the pressure of the job itself. Like I said, I always love what I do when I work. It is the personalities of coworkers, patrons, patients, customers, management level. Like, it's so much to go out in society and work with a bunch of people that, like I said, come from different backgrounds, different I gotta slow my brain down because sometimes it goes too fast, and you guys know I lose it, right? Sometimes I can get it back, sometimes I can't. And I probably won't get that back, but you guys know what I mean. Like, you have all these people, different nationalities, different backgrounds, different family structures, all coming to this place to make a living, to support their dreams or their goals, right? Um, and I have to tell my coworkers, like, when you have a bunch of people all working together, there's gonna be dispute. Like, you fight with your parents, you fight with your siblings, you fight with your children. You don't want to see them in harm's way. You don't want to cause them harm just because you have a dispute. You don't stop talking to your parents or your children or your siblings because you have a dispute. Some people do. I myself don't understand that. I never find anything so bad that would stop me from talking to my family members. I mean, they might choose to stop talking to me, and they have every right to do what they do because some of us just don't know what we don't know, right? For me, I spent enough years without my family when I was in the custody of social services that I don't wanna waste any more time not talking or I just don't get that. I don't get not talking to my siblings or like, yes, I might remove myself from them to protect myself when they become harmful to me, but to never not speak to my siblings or my parents, like, that just doesn't make sense to me. I don't know how people can do that. Um, but again, with your coworkers, like, when you're working with a bunch of people like 35 hours a week or more, right? You spend more time with these people than you do your own family in your own home. These people they become your family, like an extended family. Like you build relationships, you start to love and care about people, but that doesn't mean you're not going to ever disagree or have a dispute. Like stuff is going to happen. Um but it can get like so crazy because depending on people's level of communication skills, talking, listening, understanding, depending on how people deal with emotions. Some people get mad, they get angry, they get hurt. It's a lot, right? And when the coworkers can't resolve things amongst themselves, then management gets involved. Now it's about a bunch of he said, she said, like you were back in high school. Um, and management, they have to come to a conclusion, right? Because they weren't there, they didn't witness the interaction between the two people, right? So they have to form their opinion or make a judgment when they don't even have all the facts. They wasn't there, they did not see what happened. All they can go on is what this one said and what that one said. It gets crazy and like I said, these managers, right? Um depending on their mental health status, depending on their upbringing, depending on their family values, people have like morals and principles, right? Like some of us do. We may not all have them. I don't even think if everybody know what morals and principles are, but I do. So I try my best to be able to communicate with someone in a loving and caring way. But with that being said, I do get bumped into feelings of being overwhelmed when I am dealing with people who don't know how to communicate in a healthy, positive way. Maybe they're bumped into feelings. Maybe they're angry. Maybe they're hurt. Maybe they're scared they're going to lose their job. So this whole other personality takes place in front of you, and you're like, what the fuck is happening right now? Um, Sometimes it's just too much. It really is. Like, I don't know how people do it. Like I said, with my mental health disease, I have managed to work my entire life. I have managed to not go out on Social Security disability. A lot of people went that route because they struggle with day to day activities due to their mental health illnesses. And although I struggle with that as well, I have managed to work throughout the years just because I was determined to not let my mental health disease disable me. I didn't want it to hold me hostage. I didn't want to, let my disease be my identity. Um, so I pushed through, even though it has not been easy. I have lost many jobs. I have experienced homelessness more times than I can recall because I would have an apartment that I would be paying market price rent for, and then I would lose my job and lose my income and not able to bounce back as quickly and time to continue to pay my market price rent. And I would go into debt, I would fall behind in my rent, and eventually I'd have to give up the apartment because I couldn't afford it anymore. Um, so yeah, I've experienced homelessness because I struggle with not just getting a job, but maintaining a job for several years. I wanna say the longest job I've ever had was my recent job that I was at for 5 years, and guess what? After 5 years of service, they fired me. Um, you would think that people would get used to living like this, but you can never get used to living like this. You can never get used I mean, it's so detrimental to your mental health, the fear of, you know, um, having a stable income, the fear of having a stable roof over your head, shelter. We're talking basic things. We're not even talking about traveling and the luxuries in life. We're talking basic human need, shelter, income. A lot of people struggle with that. It's not just me. Um, and I can tell you it does affect your mental health disease. Like being homeless, like, there were times that I had to go into a shelter, and I can tell you this, right? The first time I ever experienced homelessness was when I moved here to Rhode Island, and I was probably in my 40s. I have never experienced homelessness until I moved here to Rhode Island in my 40s, and I have never been arrested as an adult. I have never been to jail. Um, I think that people who have gotten arrested and who have gone to jail, like, I think going to jail is a traumatic experience, right? Because we don't know what goes on in those prisons. I've known a lot of people that they would be one way, right? And when they go into prison and they come back out, they don't come back out the same person. I can only imagine what that person experienced in prison. Um, And I'm saying all that just to say, like, again, I'm not the only person in this world with a mental health condition. Things happen to people like all the time, right? I gotta tell you guys, like, let's first talk about what can cause a mental health disease, okay? So, any injury to your head, a blow to your head, whether you sustain a blow to your head because you're in a fight, like a fist fight with someone, right? That person may bluntly hit you in just the right spot in your head, right? How about if you're fighting and you fall down and your head hits the ground? Um, how about if you get hit by a car? How about if you are in a car and you get into a car accident? Like, these are the physical aspects that can cause a mental health disease because we have this, like, our brain is like soft tissue, right? And it lives underneath a skeletal bone whose that the purpose is to protect that soft tissue. And anytime you take a blow to your head, like you fall and hit your head on the ground, you get into a car accident, you get punched in the head. Like it doesn't take much for that soft tissue to shift just a little bit, right? The human body was not designed to take that kind of an impact. There are going to be some consequences. Um, Look at people who play sports, football. When I tell you guys the human brain was not designed to take impacts to the head like that, it can cause a mental health illness, like something, a brain injury, something happened to the brain. Another physical aspect, right, guys? The brain makes certain chemicals. They're called neurotransmitters, right? Sometimes the brain does not produce enough of one chemical or another. Those neurotransmitters, maybe they were injured. Who knows? So, with my mental health illness being diagnosed with depression, right? So, the brain makes two chemicals, serotonin, epinephrine. Apparently, mine doesn't make enough of one or the other. So, I have to take medication. The medication is just the chemicals that the brain should be naturally producing, but for whatever reason, mine does not. So they mix these chemicals that the brain is supposed to naturally produce and they put it in a little pill. It's to help balance out the chemicals. Like um, some chemicals they either don't produce enough of itself or for whatever reason it's falling behind. It's not producing enough of one or the other. Hence you get depression. And that's just depression. We don't even know, like I said, there are many different forms of mental health disease. You have depression, you have manic, you have bipolar, um, you have schizophrenia. You have DID, which is dissociative identity disorder. Um, they even put autism under mental health illnesses, which I wonder about that because I always believed autism to be a developmental issue, not a mental health issue, but I'm not a scientist. Um, you have panic attacks, you have anxiety, you have social anxiety. Some people don't do well socializing with others, right? Um, you have ADHD. There's just so many things, and depending on what your diagnosis is, it's going to depend on how it affects you, how it affects your life. Um, So we talked about the diagnosis, we talked about signs and symptoms, and we talked about causes and effects. Um, with that being said, I'm gonna start closing down this session. I am a woman in my mid 50s with a mental health disease. I have depression, anxiety, and panic attacks. I've had it most of my life. I probably had it all of my life, but it didn't become clear to me until my mid 20s when I first started having signs and symptoms. Again, I believe my mother's mother, whom I've never met, may have had a mental health illness. Mom said her mother went crazy and died in a mental institution, which set off alarms for me that that might be something I needed to look into because, like I said, growing up with my mother, it was not easy. She was very abusive to us. A lot of people may have thought it stemmed from her active addiction, but not realize that there was a dual diagnosis. She has a mental health illness that went undetected. Even when she my mother is now in her 70s. She hasn't used drugs in many years, but she still has signs and symptoms of a mental health illness. Um, my sister, struggled and suffered through her mental health illness her entire life. I myself have a mental health illness. Like I said, according to the researchers, the scientists, the studies, if you have a blood relative, such as a parent or a sibling, who has a mental health illness, chances are there are other family members with a mental health illness as well. I am living proof of that. Um, and that's just how do I want to say that? That's just the aspect of it being passed down from family member to family member or from one generation to the next generation. That's just the inside factors. I call them inside factors and I call them outside factors. The inside factors is that you could have been born with the disease. The outside factors would be the environment that you grew up in. If you were abused as children, um, if you've had any injuries to your head, um, there's just so many outside factors that can cause a mental health illness. Um, I check all the boxes. Um, and like I said, because I wrote my book, God's Gift to You, Book One, talking about childhood trauma, talking about the disease of addiction, talking about mental health illness, how it affected the young adults in my community where I grew up, and how those things affected the children growing up in that community. Since I started to share my story about my childhood trauma, I then wanted to advocate for mental health awareness, mental health wellness tied to education because it is so important that people are aware of mental health illnesses because whether you have a mental health illness that is identified, acknowledged, and addressed, or not identified, acknowledged, or addressed, it is still going to have consequences on your life. It is still going to affect your life whether you identify it or not, right? But knowledge is power. Like I said, when I was a little girl growing up in this environment, I knew nothing about mental health illnesses, but I was living in it and it was affecting me. Um, when I talk about God's gift to you, right? We're not talking about religion. Let me just make that clear because not only are there stigmas and misinformation that were placed in me from the community that I grew up in, but when I started to learn about religion, there are stigmas and misinformation about mental health illnesses with religion. And because of my so-called faith, I denied taking meds for many years. Well, not that many years because I wouldn't have lasted that many years. But it did take me some time to get past the information and the stigmas placed on me and my mental health disease by religion. God can fix anything. All you got to do is pray. All you got to do is believe. Imma tell you, all the praying and all the believing in the world was not making me better. Yes, God can fix anything, but there's some things that you gotta do too to help him. It's like saying, like, if you want a job, right? You sit on your couch and you pray every day God gives you a job, right? If you don't get off your butt off that couch and go get that job, you're not gonna get a job. I don't care how much you pray. So, by me advocating for mental health awareness, mental health wellness tied to education, I want to teach people, right, about mental health illnesses, signs, symptoms, causes, effects, breaking those barriers, the stigmas that were placed in us from our communities, from our either our communities and neighborhoods that we grew up in, or even the religion aspect, thinking God is going to fix you. But guess what? How I got past the religion aspect was I had to realize, right? God gave people certain gifts. God must have known that some of his people were going to need some mental health meds. So he gave certain people knowledge and wisdom on mental health illnesses and, the scientists, the researchers, the chemists. He gave them knowledge on how to mix some chemicals and put them in a little tiny pill for people with mental health illnesses to take. I don't know how to mix chemicals to treat a mental health illness. So thank God for the gifts. So when I talk about God's gift to you, right, it's not about religion, it's about the gifts that we get along the way because even though I was horrifically abused growing up as a child, even though I now have a mental health disease, right? The gift is that I survived it. Because in this book, I also talk about the children who never made it out of these communities. So when I talk about God's gift to you, I'm talking about the gifts. One, that I survived. Yes, I have a mental health illness, but I was able to educate myself. I was able to continue working. I was able to realize that something was wrong with me and that I needed to start seeking help and I needed to start getting treatment because a lot of people have a mental health disease that they don't even identify. They still out there suffering in silence. And I'm gonna tell you, a lot of people don't talk about mental health illnesses because society will judge them and criticize them and make them feel stupid and put them to shame. So again, I teach about the misinformation about mental health illnesses and how people perceive people with mental health illnesses. We are not stupid. We know what's going on. And mental health illness does not mean crazy. Whatever crazy is, right? Who knows? How do you determine crazy? Like I said, even with a mental health illness, I have never been arrested in my adult years. I have never caused harm to anybody else. There are different levels of mental health illnesses, and the severity of mental health illnesses depends on the diagnosis. Um, you know, it just makes me so angry, right? When people judge other people and they don't even know that person. They see the way a person's life is, they see how a person behaves, and they got all the answers, right? And never even considered that that person may have a mental health disease. And I'm gonna tell you, if somebody has a mental health disease, if you are not a doctor, you are not a provider, you are not a counselor, you're not a therapist, you know, you can educate them about a mental health disease, but you don't have what it takes to make them better. Like, We have to get these people into their providers, you know, to start talking to their providers about what they're going through in life and how it's affecting them. Um, like I said, I am a woman in my 50s. I have had a mental health disease my entire life. I have been surrounded by other family members, such as my mom, my sister, um, and possibly even my brothers, that have mental health diseases and how it affected us, how it affected our lives. Um, and the fact that a lot of us, we don't talk about it. We don't talk about our mental health diseases because society will judge us. Um, and like I said, a lot of people are more comfortable with talking about diabetes, hypertension, um, obesity, cardiovascular diseases. You start talking about mental health and watch how people shut down, shut up, or walk away. They don't like talking about that stuff. And like I said, I was one of those people. But since I wrote my book, God's Gift to You, book one, and started talking about my experiences as a young girl growing up in a society that was overflowing with young adults who had mental health illnesses, having children, selling drugs, abusing drugs, like, it was bad. It was bad. And this is not about embarrassing people or putting people out there or telling people's business. This is my story. This is about me. This is about me wanting to talk about it and educate my people in the hopes that they can start seeking help and getting better. Um, so that's why I decided to advocate for mental health awareness, mental health wellness tied to education. I want to be the one, and a lot of people was like, "Oh, why don't you just do a podcast?" I don't want to do a podcast. I want people to see and have a face to see a person with a mental health illness. We don't look like we have mental health illnesses, but we do. And yes, it affects our lives, it affects our decisions, it affects our choices. Um, a lot of people, right? We don't pretend to have a mental health illness. We pretend to be well because we don't want the world to see us when we're struggling. We don't want the world to judge us because of our illnesses. We are human beings just like anybody else. We have emotions, we have feelings, we know how to think, um, just like any other person. It does affect relationships. I'm a woman in my mid 50s and I've never been married. It doesn't mean that I haven't sustained a long-term relationship with someone. I have. I've been with someone for 18 years. And since I left that 18-year relationship, I have not been able to have a lasting relationship with people because, like I said, I'm not the only one out there in this world with a mental health disease. And it makes it difficult for me to date because I have to protect my own mental health disease. I cannot be in a relationship with someone who has a mental health disease, who is not identifying, acknowledge, or addressing their mental health disease. I cannot be in a relationship with someone who's going to trigger me and my signs and symptoms of my mental health disease. Like, there's a whole lot to having a successful relationship. I have never had one. And it's not like I don't know how to have one. It's just that we live in a world where, like I said, I'm not the only one with a mental health illness, and I can't be involved with certain people who may trigger my signs and symptoms of my mental health illness. It makes it harder for us to date. Do we know how to love? Absolutely, we know how to love. But unfortunately, it's difficult to find people who who do know how to love and be in a healthy relationship with someone else. The society has gotten so used to a climate of it being normal for people to lie, to cheat, to manipulate. You have grown men in relationships still out here trying to sleep around with other women. You want to tell me those people don't have a mental health illness? Like, you have men who are married who pursue other women. They lie, they manipulate. You have men in long-term relationships with women, and they don't wanna marry that woman, and they continue to pursue other relationships, right? But they don't walk away from their relationship with their main woman, and some of the women know them men cheat, and they choose to stay. Like I said, I'm not the only one out here with a mental health illness. The difference is that I identify, acknowledge, and address it. Anyway, guys, like I said, my name is Johnny Belinda Hopkins, author of my first public book, God's Gift to You, Book One, talking about childhood trauma and things that can lead to a mental health illness. I talk about different diagnoses, signs and symptoms, causes and effects. Um, I just wanted to create a platform on social media from the safety and privacy of my own home that people can go to get information about mental health illnesses. I am not a provider, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a counselor, I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a therapist. Um, my goal is to simply show up and show people what it's like for a person with a mental health illness in the hopes that people will begin to understand mental health diseases. I hope that, even if people don't have a mental health illness, to be able to educate them if they have a loved one, a parent, a sibling, a child, or friend who has a mental health illness, and you're trying to connect with that person and support that person, and you need some information about not just how to do it, but how to do it appropriately. Because you don't want to injure somebody who's already been injured. So that's why I created my YouTube page, Jonniebee 9458, advocating for mental health awareness, mental health wellness tied to education. It's a very difficult topic, but I talk about it because I am a person with a mental health disease who want to educate others and support other people with mental health illnesses. So thank you for stopping by my YouTube channel and giving me an hour and a half of your time, getting to know each other and learn what um, my YouTube channel is about. If you find this information helpful, please share, share, share. If you come across my YouTube channel, please hit the subscribe button. Let's get the numbers up so that we can educate people about mental health illnesses. We can support people with mental health illnesses. And I'm pausing because I'm trying to think of the right words. So we want to educate people about mental health illnesses. We want to support people with mental health illnesses, and we want to prevent people from losing their battles to mental health illnesses because it is a matter of life and death for some of us. Have a good evening, everyone. Be well.